It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. We're back. It's happening again. It's another podcast.
The chaos continues.
Say hello and introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Elster Hura.
Hi, I'm Peter Lawrence.
Hello, I'm Chad Jetner.
I talked over Elle while she was giving her
That's
introduction.
all right.
Now I feel horrible.
That's
And
unlike
I'm
you.
Cal
Don't
Bach.
feel horrible.
We're going to talk about rules today. Making them, breaking them.
Podcast rules, all the ones that we've broken, or
Yeah.
other rules?
Rules in general. There's too many rules. Why do we have rules? When do you break the rules? Is it okay to break the rules? Chad, you're a rule breaker.
I don't think so. I think rules get adjusted based on my behavior, for the better. I don't necessarily go out to intentionally break any rules, but I also intentionally don't read them. So how can you break a rule that you don't know exists, right?
Agreed.
So
think the
you
original
stand
title of this
still
was-
and the rules just kind of move around you as you flow through life.
Yeah. Right.
So
I think the
is
original
your-
title was.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was gonna say, so do they, when you say I'm discovering rules that didn't exist, was that a conscious ignorance?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, honestly, the fewer rules you're aware of, the fewer rules you are consciously able to break. So you can claim ignorance or innocence and then just ask for forgiveness and then do it again the next time. And it's very effective in getting things done. That's the ultimate goal is to deliver a thing effectively, efficiently, and fast. And sometimes rules are in place that make that harder than it needs to be
Agreed.
if they were all obeyed.
Yeah, rules can be the enemy of productivity, unless they make things more productive. Like unless breaking those rules kind of
Trying to
force
think
you
of
to
an
get
example.
each other's way. I can't think of an example of a good rule off the top of my head.
Don't check things in on Friday afternoon before a vacation. That's
Right.
a rule.
So
Give me 3
we do-
days notice before requesting a brand new system.
We do have some good guidelines, right? Not necessarily hard rules, but like one of the best guidelines is never check in code without running all your tests first, right? Always run the unit tests, no matter what.
No,
Yeah.
that's what the build does for you. It tells you which ones you broke.
Or even
Peter-
worse, that's what QA's for. Like, sure way to anger your QA team.
Well, I've done that
Peter,
too,
the
but
chaos that ensues.
No.
Run your.
so I create
Oh,
the
is
pull.
this going to be a nerd fight?
No. I'll just give a quick. I'll create a pull request. Sometimes I will have forgotten to run tests because the change that I made was so inconsequential that it couldn't possibly have broken any tests. And then before merging, the test will have run and told me that I'm dumb, and then I will fix them. But so no code goes out of my hands without having run tests. But yes,
But
I'm a.
Literally left your
Very-
hands.
It
into your
certainly
CI/CD.
left my machine. Yes.
Uh-huh.
I
So
never.
Yeah.
I grew up without tests, man. We didn't. They didn't invent unit tests
the
back
Wild
when I
West.
started.
Peter, you grew up without the internet. You grew up without
Yes.
64 color monitor. Like, what was the first monitor resolution that you grew up in? 16K?
No,
I
it
remember the
was.
switch from 30.
It was
switch
80 by
16K.
25 characters, and it was green.
Uh-huh.
There was no resolution. There was no,
And it was made by IBM. Like
and it was made
that's
by
all there
IBM.
were. Yeah.
And it probably could have dropped down 3 stories of stairs and been fine.
So guidelines are rules that you really don't enforce. They're just there to kind of make things better.
Well, enforcement for us is not necessarily hazing, but we do make light of, oh, somebody did exactly what Peter just mentioned, right? They checked something in, they created a pull request, and in the pull request, all of our tests run, and we've seen something that fails, and yeah, you're gonna get lit up in a fun way, not like necessarily, there's no consequences really, but
I certainly ebb and flow. I get better at it, and I'm like, oh, I've got this down, and then another couple days go by, and I'll just be like, oh, I totally forgot to run prettier, and I know I hit format, but but formatting's not working well, so I should have run prettier, and yeah, all those fun things. I'm not a process guy.
I'm not either. And the less I know about it, but there are a few things, like you start a team, and we talked about this a few months ago, when you start a team and you create like team norms, right? And that's one of we call that a norm, not necessarily a rule. It's like, hey, run your tests before you check in code, make sure everything passes, do your pull requests, like go over pull requests a couple times a day. If somebody has something out there, don't let it sit for more than an afternoon.
That's just evil.
What do you, Peter? Oh my God, I can't wait to be on a project with you. What a treat that.
Leaving a pull request for hours is evil. Not making you do them. No. It's leaving them for a long time is evil. We're on the same page.
Okay. All right. Thank God. I was going to say,
Kyle, save us. Get us back to rules.
I think rules kind of have an or else built in.
Yes.
Right. There's consequences for not following them. Yeah. Guidelines, like you're enforcing guidelines through social measures of hazing or ribbing or public ridicule, whatever you're doing, in a good way, though, in a fun way. And, but like an actual rule, like if time has to be recorded every hour for every task, and it's due at the end of every day, and now you have like this administrative overhead. But if it's like, or you're just done, or you will be fired, or some dire consequences, you may do it while you're searching Indeed for other jobs.
Well, I think that's the luxury of our career trajectory now. Like when we become, if we ever involve ourselves in that kind of situation, I mean, it's instant for me. I'm not even going to look for Indeed. I'm done. I'll say goodbye, and I'll be just instantly out, right? Because we don't necessarily have to worry too much about getting picked up somewhere else, right? It's like, it's like Babe Ruth. If he got fed up with the Yankees at the height of his career, he'd walk away. I'm sure there would be a team for Babe Ruth.
Right. So you're
those
the Babe
types
Ruth
of rules
of Java development is what I'm hearing.
No, but I mean,
all Java developers are the Babe Ruth of Java developers.
Excellent.
If you ask them, yeah. But like, no, it's a real thing though. It's not just me. I think it's almost everybody in our field, and this is why our little consulting company tries really hard to be one of the literal best places to work, is because we need good people, and good people don't stick around for nonsense. And so, that's just the nature of where we are with our careers at this moment. Even younger developers, right? Like everybody's in demand, and I don't see that waning at any point in the future. So, I mean, go ahead with the rules. The or else part of it is inconsequential to me because I don't care, right? Like your or else is your or else. My or else is I've got another spot, right? I'm fine.
Yeah, I look at like rules. The more rules you have, the less trust you have of your people. And
that's just it. Like there are different types of rules. There are rules that are in place for just legality and kind of CYA policy that a company needs to put in place, or a team needs to have put in place. But a lot of times when we're talking about process around like day-to-day work, or how we interact with each other, or what types of activities we do or things like that. That, Kyle, I think you're absolutely right, that it is just about we're establishing a rule because we don't have trust any other way, and we can't seem to either understand that we could build it a different way, or we need to start out with rules to help build a team together, and then you can kind of back off if you want to. Like there is a purpose, but you don't want to necessarily say, well, since we have a rule for laptop usage at work, that means we need to have a rule about exactly what sentences to answer at stand up every day, you know.
Yeah, like laptop usage at work or network usage at work, right?
Yeah.
Like you might have a rule that says, hey, don't stream baseball games in the middle of the afternoon. And then you might have a baseball fan that really tests how strictly that rule is enforced, right? And the reason for it, I mean, I remember actually having to struggle with bandwidth at the office, right? Like I remember that struggle, the days of Napster and LimeWire and all those things. And yeah, like that used to be a problem. It's not anymore. So the rule around network usage at the office is a little silly these days, right, Kyle?
Well, yeah.
Like, what do you? I'm sorry.
Well,
Kyle.
we don't really have any rules in place about network usage in our office. It's, don't do bad things. That's kind of built into just expected behavior from a human being that's going to be in the workplace on your network. So you don't really need, it might be in the policy so that if you need to hold somebody accountable for like horrible behavior, eventually it's there to protect, the company against evildoers. But generally we don't need to, indoctrinate people into the rules of the internet when they come into the office. We have an employee handbook, we have a security policy, those things are in place. And that's to, again, protect the company in case, somebody does evil. But generally, we trust people to behave. And so we don't really sweat it.
Yeah, because how much of knowing the why around rules for me is just, it's so critical, because then once you sort of understand, okay, what was the condition that happened that resulted in this rule being put in place? Like, is this just power tripping and someone needs to know what you're doing every second because that's their job and they're not sure what to do when it's quiet? Or I think, Chad, in your case with the network issue is, okay, yeah, there's a rule because it used to be a problem. It's not a problem anymore. So this might be a rule that I can kind of flex a little bit more.
Although if everybody chose
Yes.
that day to stream that ball game, you might feel the impact of that. And the network people would be like, just a reminder, hey.
Just a reminder, there's a big TV set up in the conference room with the game streaming.
Yes.
You don't need to all do it yourselves.
Right.
No, I think that, now it's a situation of, are you hurting yourself? You're streaming 20 different things in super high def. Like, yeah, you're watching 4K video while you're trying to do work in the cloud. Maybe you're not, as productive as you could be. But to your point about streaming, Chad, like if having that game going is giving you joy while you're working,
so much joy.
You might be actually more productive by streaming that game. So not following that rule or a lack of that rule might actually be good for productivity.
I actually have a whole speech around it now because last time I did that, randoms walk by and hang out and watch the game. And we've already talked about making connections at clients with our, with other random people and how important that is. So not only does it spark a little bit of joy in your buddy over here, it also is kind of a lightning rod to attract, other random folks and to initiate conversations and to meet just random people. So I highly recommend everybody stream every baseball game that occurs during the workday at all times. And also, literally everybody is streaming video nonstop throughout the day now anyway when they're on a Teams call. So we've probably
Yes.
got bandwidth covered. I have an
Wait,
example.
I'm streaming video right now? Dang it.
Oh,
Yes, Peter. And we will have a conversation about your outfit. I have an example of a
What?
good rule that might. I'm kidding, guys. For the people
I almost
listening,
wore-
Peter is dressed appropriately.
I almost wore a hoodie for you, but I didn't.
Oh, dude.
It was an
Um,
SDG hoodie. So
I almost did until I decided I didn't want to.
no, I was
So,
wearing it earlier and it was just too hot. So I
Mm.
switched out.
So my oldest boy is in the Minnesota National Guard. He's a supply sergeant. Now, in his role, he's got more stringent rules. He sent me a
Yeah.
picture. I'll hold it up to the camera, and I'll just describe it for folks. But he has he's disposing of IED material, right, for training purposes.
Right.
And one of the rules is that all of that material, I don't know if you can see it there, but it has to be tagged with some tape that says it is inert, right?
Right.
So it is probably not going to blow up, probably. That is probably not a rule that I would consciously choose to break, right? I mean,
No.
it would make for great April Fool's jokes. But
Would it
I
though?
would, I mean, maybe.
Might depend on the audience.
Yeah. I mean, the right goof at the right moment with IEDs, it could be fun. But yeah, that's in our careers, in what we do, it is incredibly easy for us to just say, I mean, we understand why you put that rule in place. We get it. Not gonna do that, right?
Right.
His role, a little different.
yeah. It's like a naming convention. It's there to help people so that they know what something is. But if something gives a file name a cryptic name that nobody understands, like the world doesn't end, no one's going to get hurt, and someone's going to see it and probably like open it up, look at it, and rename it. And that person is probably going to be me.
Let's hope.
But then it's going to be the shaming and the reminding and that kind of stuff to make sure that that person never does that again. But that's like the outcome is a benefit, but is the enforcement and all of that, is that more overhead than it's worth? You know, I think there's a trade-off. There's an administrative aspect to rules, an accountability aspect. There's, personal employee experience. There's a lot of factors, and I think I fall in the less rules, the better camp on all that stuff. Model behavior, have expectations, but trust people.
So, Kyle, you're in the IT business right now,
Yeah.
and you probably have a form to have some work done that someone could fill out, and it would give you appropriate notice to let you know what work you've got to do.
I have a
ahead
couple
of time.
forms. Yeah, I've got one that opens when you hit new message in Outlook. I've got one that's in Slack that you type in. I don't really have an official like work order form or ticketing system.
No, but as you get bigger to giant corporation size, those forms tend to get more formalized and more horrible for the developers to fill out, because especially new developers that don't know which fields to leave blank and which fields to fill out until they've done it wrong a few times and gotten the
No
response
one,
back.
no one person on the planet, unless they're like an IT manager, likes to hear the words, you have to put in a ticket for that.
Yeah.
So,
Well, actually, I have a great
Yes,
story around that, right? Like that whole process. You put in a ticket, right? Like we don't start working until you put in a ticket. That rule, that specific rule, is one of the most that's one that really just it irks me, right? Because depending on context, right? Like putting in a ticket and following a process that goes through a queue and gets prioritized and all this other stuff is like costs industry so much money, like such a
Absolutely.
ridiculous sum of money, right?
But
Like,
there's
can
a
you
reason it
imagine?
got created, right?
Mhm.
Sure.
Because
Yeah, we
And I
wanted
get it.
to have better tracking, so we knew what things were costing us and what types of things we're having, and to make hiring decisions. But is all that
Yeah,
really
no, I
happening?
get that.
Is all that really happening? Like, are people examining and the reporting, and is it accurate? Like, can somebody determine the priority of their ticket in terms of the organization? Well, this is
mine
an
are all
emergency.
urgent.
This
I
is
know
a
that.
high priority. Yeah. Um, until it's a problem to manage the tasks, I think if you have a team of multiple people that will be jumping in and out of tasks, so you may work a task for a while, then I may work a task for a while, then just having that in a central location
Yep.
is important. So that's when it becomes, but right now I'm the only one doing it. So
There are benefits, and Chad, I'm sure you
Right.
know that there are benefits to following through the horrible ticketing system that you're currently dealing with. And wouldn't it be nice if you had a ticketing admin that you could just tell in words what you wanted and they would fill out the ticket and it would just happen, right? And make it.
Well, it's almost like sometimes there's this imbalance to where you decide, okay, we need to start having rules. We need to have this really giant, let's keep with the ticketing workflow.
Yes.
And there's usually regular evaluations for what other rules do we need to put in place then? What other ticketing module? And there's never an evaluation for, have we gone too far and maybe we could remove some of the steps in this workflow? Because I think if we did that, you might get a little bit more
Buy-in.
useful rules.
If I were the king of IT, we would have a ticketing system. And for the frontline people that get the requests, like, the rules on ticketing would be, you're going to put the ticket in, not the end user or the person asking for help. You're going to take that request for help any way you get it. Email, Slack, conversation in the hallway. You're going to own that, and then you're going to put a ticket in, because you're going to get really, really good at putting tickets in, and it's going to be really fast for you to do it. And also, you can paraphrase what they told you. Instead of them like writing a big story about the issue, you can just shorten it up and say, hey, this person needs X. What I would also do is, if you can handle it within 15 minutes, do it immediately and don't bother putting a ticket in for it. Like, don't get bogged down in tiny details, and don't let tiny tasks pile up. There's nothing worse than somebody that knows a thing takes 5 minutes waiting 2 weeks for it to happen.
That's my general rule of thumb, is that if the documentation takes longer than the task, then you screwed up, right? Like, there's something wrong. If it takes longer for me to fill out paperwork and the TPS reports than to do the thing, then we've got issues.
Right.
I'm sorry, Al, what were you going to say?
No, I want to push that a little further, because I think that's worth talking about. So let's say the documentation takes longer than the task, but the documentation is needed for someone else to maintain it. Is it fair to say then that the task should have been completed in a different way to make it easier?
I think, yeah, we're getting down the like.
Oh
devil
no,
may-
I'm totally going
yeah.
down a tangent.
Yeah. No, I get where you're going with it.
I
And
think
it's
we
not-
need
you're
some ground rules about rabbit holes and not going down them.
You're not wrong, right? Like, and we might take something, so like pull requests. We like to have pull requests attached to stories so that we can track that back to, we have a pattern that we can see, like, where we were going with something. But there's other things where, like, oh, somebody had a typo, right? And we're not going to create a pull request for a typo somewhere that attaches to a story. Like, we're not going to introduce 3 paragraphs of process to fix a 2-character problem, right? That's the kind of stuff that drives me nuts, because I've been in situations where folks have insisted on a process over an efficient way,
Over an outcome.
over an outcome. There you go. Thank you. That's what I was looking for. They were more concerned with
Fair.
the process being followed than the outcomes that generate. And that's ridiculous. And I will lose my.
And that's
Gosh.
where the why a rule is in place is really good to know. So I'm wondering, Peter, as you're taking a drink, and I'm timing this question perfectly when you have liquid in your mouth. When let's say you're at a location where there are hard and fast rules and you need to break them, how do you go about doing that? Or do you ever ask for permission to break a rule, or you?
No.
Okay.
Never ask for permission to break a rule. Definitely go with the forgiveness route that we've talked about in the past. It's just, I mean, if it becomes a thing, then yeah, you're going to be like, okay, this rule is nonsense and we need to change the rule, because I've had to break this rule 12 times and none of us are winning with this rule. And you can feel those happen in certain situations, right? Like, oh, I need to fill out a ticket for the ticket. I need to create a ticket to create a ticket in the other ticketing system to, like, really? That's what we're going to do? No, I don't think so. But at the same time, you don't want just, Peter Lawrence to come in and create a server in production and spin it up and do whatever he wants. And, oh, well, I just needed a web server for a couple hours. I know it was connected to, root storage and everything else and the main database, but, I only needed it for a couple hours. Hackers probably weren't going to find it, so I'm okay. No, that's probably not the wise thing to do. And that's probably happened, which is probably why there was a rule for that, right? Most of these rules, one would hope, and one being me, is that these rules were created to solve a problem rather than they were created to create a rule. Like, I have a blank spot in my rule list, I better create a rule to go in there.
Yeah, they're reactive.
Unless your job is to make rules.
Yes.
It's probably to stop a negative outcome from happening again.
Again, right.
But how often does that negative outcome happen? And is that negative outcome like an indicator that that somebody did something they shouldn't have, and then you can correct that behavior? So does there need to be a rule in there? It's like, are people going to know that rule exists? Are they going to remember? Like, are you going to go over the rules with people all the time to make sure they remember every single one?
Have a giant meeting with the rules handbook, hand it out and page through it every day, reading out loud the specific rules. Boy, does that sound like a blast. I want to work there. No.
We have rules happy hours where we get together and just read rules to each other.
Said no one ever.
I mean,
no one ever has had a rules happy hour.
I would be down for that if it was completely ancient, weird laws. Like, isn't there one that, like, you can't cross over from Minnesota into Wisconsin with a duck on your head or something like that?
Oh, God,
like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
like
if
that,
you do the
I would
story
gladly
behind
go to that rules happy hour.
That would be a good one. Obscure rules that don't get enforced.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and then
like one that you can't serve a piece of apple pie in Wisconsin without including a slice of cheese. I don't know if that's real.
We should have that happy hour and then actually break all of those rules. Like, you have to present a rule.
Absolutely.
Break
Yeah.
it, or actually, no, do what the rule is preventing you from doing, and then see if people can guess what the rule was. Right?
Ooh, there you
That
go.
would be a great happy. That sounds like fun.
I think the duck on the head would
obscure laws.
be a giveaway, but and companies have those all the time, right? There's rules on the books, so to speak, that go away because they obviously got in the way more than they helped, and it was easier to ignore that rule than it was to get rid of that rule at the time, right?
Yeah,
And
some of my favorite people to work with are like the tech leads or the managers who know a rule is stupid and they are very open about, so I'm going to shield you from the consequences of this. Now just go do it.
right.
Right. Go be productive and cooperative and work well together. And we're not going to sweat all these little small things. I think a rule should be like, if you don't do this, then something really bad is going to happen. Or you're gonna experience some kind of loss. Hey, if we don't get your expenses in on time, we can't submit them. Or if we can't take expenses for last year 6 months into the next year because the taxes and the accounting and all that stuff's been done, and now we don't know what to do with this, so we're just not going to pay you. I don't know if that's a real thing or not, but I'm just saying things like that where there's some kind of physics involved. Don't go beyond this point. Okay, well, maybe I will. Well, maybe you'll fall off a cliff then. That's why there's a sign there, because of Bill.
I feel like the expenses thing is directly aimed at me because I literally just broke some expense rules.
I was not aware of that, but
Okay, but with that, Chad, I'm curious. So there are absolutely times when you need to break a rule. The setting aside rules where if you break them and you get caught, you get fired or, extreme consequences, you run the risk potentially of damaging relationships between other people you work with if they're not okay with you breaking the rule, or they're suddenly like, well, you're breaking the rule, why I never get to break. Like, have you ever had to deal with breaking a rule but still making sure that you are keeping your working relationship strong?
Yes. And I usually solve that by just always being adorable. Because it's hard to be mad at somebody that's adorable, right? And so it's a good
That's
point.
true.
Yeah. And
not that you're adorable, but it's hard to be mad at somebody. Just want to clarify
No,
that.
you don't have to backpedal, Kyle. I believed you at first. I believed you when you said it's true that I'm adorable and that it's hard to be mad at somebody. But yeah, no, that's a great point, Elle, because I'm sure like they don't want, again, with the guidelines thing, like, yes, probably if everybody did a thing, it would present problems. But if you're aware of the context for why we're doing a certain thing, and if you trust that, there's good intentions, we're not just doing this because it's, we don't have bad outcomes with when we break these rules. It's all, that's all I care about, right? And then don't just enforce it because it's there. Just be reasonable, which is a thing that I say way too much, but it's true, But yes, if you're adorable, boy, the amount of things you can get away with just by being super cute and funny and hilarious and all
you.
of that, boy. Yeah, right, Kyle? I mean, that applies to all of us here.
I
Right?
think that brings up another point. Uneven enforcement of rules, which
100%.
will create issues.
Yep.
Well, so-and-so did it and they got away with it. And now you're harping on me for it. And it's like, well, you're not adorable. And they're like, oh, okay. Yeah.
That's not a good enough
that's
reason.
true. It's not. No.
But there are, I mean,
phrase it differently.
you can't break all the rules all the time, right?
No.
And you can break, well, I mean, it goes with everything, right? You can break some of the rules some of the time, right? You can't break all the rules all the time, and you can't break none of the rules none of the time. It's practically impossible to know all the rules, especially considering the laws of Minnesota, for example. Knowing all of them, there's three or four books that are thicker than you want to read of laws, and nobody reads them. But breaking some of the rules some of the time when it's appropriate, and following that same rule some of the time. I've done both of those things, right? Like, I'm not putting in a ticket for this, but I will put in a ticket for this. Or I'm not going to put in a cab request for this thing, but I will put in a cab request for this other thing, because a spelling mistake is different. A spelling mistake fixed in data is different than a mathematical error in tax calculations for sales tax, for example. Something like that.
Yeah.
Not that I've done that
What's a
particular
what's a
one.
cab request?
Cabs are
Change advisory board.
Yeah, there are
Right.
groups that in giant companies that review changes to make sort of decisions about interactive systems from clobbering each other during a change. Well, no, you can't make a change to the database at our highest use moment in time because that's our highest use moment of time, or something like that.
Yeah. Or you can't make your change because the databases will be down for patching.
Right.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I've been to these meetings. So that's usually like a weekly meeting, right? And you
Yep.
got to represent
Yeah.
your change and
Yep.
blah, blah, blah. Okay. Yeah. I get
Yeah.
it. All right. I've never heard it called a cab request before, but that makes sense.
Yeah,
Having
it's
that, change control in a large organization where, this change is going to negatively impact 1,000 people,
Mhm.
and that's going to cost us millions of dollars. So we want this to have some kind of rigor to say, do we really need this? And that's what the cab is for. You have to go in and defend your change and things like that. But if it's you use the wrong it should be you are that version. Like, just go do it. Did that go through cab? No. Is it gonna? No.
I feel like an effective strategy for folks that need to represent these changes and they're like, just like perfect, like the Han Solo shrug, right? Where he's just like, like just perfect that move if you're doing these changes live and in person. And people will be like, oh, you're fine, right? He gave the shrug and nothing bad ever happens after the shrug. So
right.
I
That's
just
right.
like to call out that I fixed a spelling error, and it was the wrong use of your in our employee directory that's been there for like 5 years, and somebody just caught it.
Oh, thank
So
goodness.
I fixed it, so you can all rest easy.
Now I can stop making those changes in pencil in my own copy.
I did go through cab. I had to go through several weeks of negotiations. Yeah, I think in that case, there's a definite reason, but there has to be some, judgment in there. And, you can have rules, but still trust your people. Like, okay, these rules are in place so that you use your judgment to follow them or not. Like, we're going to leave it up to you to determine whether or not that rule really applies.
Stop, look, and listen.
Yeah,
Before crossing the street.
exactly. Guidelines, governance, you have to have some of it, but I don't think it should be for its own sake. There should be a really good reason behind every one of them. And sometimes it might just be, get someone to stop and think. But then at that point, to your point, Peter, like sometimes just having a sign or something like that, having something built into the system that's going to help you follow the rules, or you don't need to know the rules. It's just built in. Like that's ideal.
Yeah. Or how often are rules put in place because that offloads the responsibility of training your team? So like sometimes it's just easier to say, don't touch that, instead of, hey, let's talk about what this is. Here, let me give you an overview. This is why you shouldn't touch it.
Or having to be the bad person and say, no, you can't do that. Well, why can't I do that? Well, because I said so.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can explain it, but it's War and Peace, and it's going to take a while. Or you could just accept that you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I get the feeling if I put a button on the wall in the office and said, do not press this button, Chad would be in the office pushing that button before the end of the podcast.
That would be the most pushed button on the planet.
Yeah.
Practically.
It'd be great if it
Um,
just all I did was took your picture, the person pushing the button.
Oh, that'd be even better. That would be awesome.
And that's when you build the wall of shame.
And we call out these things and we talk about them a little bit, sort of lackadaisically on this podcast because we've all faced rules that did not belong, but there's certainly some rules that do belong. And
Totally.
I mean, we've followed them, right? I've followed rules. Even rules that I did not like, I have followed.
Yeah, because again, it's that kind of cost benefit. Like, is it really going to be worth either facing the consequences of breaking this one rule, or is my breaking, 20 other rules going to just make my life that much harder when I do really need to break that 21st rule?
Right.
You do have to, I like stop, look, and listen. Totally. You have to think about what's the cost of breaking this rule. And if it's not that much and it's not going to impact anybody or it's not safety related, go for it. Like I think one of our DevOps coworkers said once, like, and I think this echoes, Chad, what the picture you showed from your son, which is if the change is not going to put people in physical danger, chances are it's going to be okay, and I'm not going to get that worked up about it.
Right. Yeah. If a lot of times we're not working on rocket science at the moment with, human populated rockets or anything like that. And even then, it's hard. Things go wrong.
Yeah,
we're all
totally.
human.
And like an example of stuff that we might work on is like healthcare. Like, yeah, there are reasons why we can't query the production database because we don't need to access private information.
I don't want to access
Yeah,
any
like
production
that
database unless I
opens-
have to.
Right. Yeah. Fair.
Lead us not into temptation.
Right.
I don't
Just-
want.
Keep
don't
the
give me
honest
access.
people honest.
Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes I think the first instinct might be to create a rule to make your life easier.
Yeah.
But maybe you can adapt instead. So if I say you have to have the request in 7 days, or else, well, what if I just have stuff and I just make sure I have an inventory and I make sure that I am ready. I have stuff ready to go so that if it's a day, I can adapt, I can react to that. And now I don't need to harp on people and stuff. But then if it gets out of hand, like, well, now everybody's waiting last minute and now and I just got hit with 10 of these in the same day and I was not prepared for that many. And so I think you have that tension between those two scenarios. But yeah, it's like, okay, I'm going to be ready for the rules not to be followed. And then I'm just going to ask people, just going to say, hey, if you can, it'd be nice if, but it's not going to be like a hard rule where I'm just going to, I don't like hard rules unless like they're for safety, things like that. I think they are the enemy of productivity and they frustrate people. Or administrative overhead rules. I don't like those either. Hey, make sure you do this a lot during the week that's not your regular job, that's not productive.
Agreed.
The end.
Agreed. Yeah. Well, and it's tough to complain about rules. Go ahead, Chad.
I was going to say I'm sometimes delighted when I find out how other people broke rules. For example, many large organizations now have a thing called GitHub or some kind of source code management system that is open to everybody so you can see what other patterns teams are following and all that stuff. And one of the most basic rules in what we do is please never commit usernames and passwords to your source code repository. I am always delighted to find when somebody doesn't actually do that and they, commit a username and password because it makes my job sometimes so much easier. Like,
Right.
oh shoot, I forgot what this, or I just want to see what that system is. I don't want to put in a lot of paperwork. Let's just see if anybody else has connected to that, and maybe they have the connection string and the username and the password in their repository somewhere. And oh, lo and behold, there it is. As long as that doesn't make it to production and you just use it for development, that's awesome. Thank you for breaking that rule, sir.
I used to enforce you're required to lock your computer when you're not at your desk. I would enforce that rule by hiding their desktop icons, taking a screenshot of their desktop, setting it as their desktop background so that when they clicked on stuff, nothing worked. And then that's how they would learn. Of course, that did create another support ticket for me.
I did that to Jeff Ortman the other day. I saw that he left. We were at the same client, and I saw that he left his laptop open. So I posted to Slack, hey guys, we're all going to happy hour after this. Drinks are on me. I'm buying everything. I'll see you guys at this place at this time. And then I tagged the channel, invited everybody. And I found that delightful, like absolutely hilarious.
Yeah, the locked computer has always been one of those, like, everybody knows the rule and everybody helps others recall that rule by shenanigans, right? So the more shenanigans, as long as it's non-destructive shenanigans, I think that's the best and the most fun. I'm sending this email to the team because I left my laptop unlocked and I feel really bad about it, and I will learn from this email or Slack message or what have you.
Sometimes I would just hit Windows L and lock their computer for them. And then I would get the password reset request shortly thereafter. That's why they didn't lock their computer, is they haven't remembered their password.
Wow. That's a strategy.
Their system has not been shut down for months. Yeah. But yeah, Chad, you did that just to clear that up. You and Jeff are friends. You work together a lot. You wouldn't do that to just anybody.
I wouldn't do that to somebody that I didn't know.
Right.
If it's somebody that I work with frequently, yeah, I am going to do that. But if I just see a random laptop open, I'm not just going to say, hey, we're going to blah, blah, blah. No.
I also think it's good when you can break rules to kind of show that the rule needs to be adjusted. So because I was thinking years ago, I was making a presentation deck with some analysis results and got chewed out for not using or not staying 100% to the style guide. And then I got to have a conversation about, well, I didn't use the style guide or I used part of it, and then I brought in other things because otherwise the graphs would have been illegible in black and white. It wouldn't have been good for a colorblind audience. You don't know how many people on the other side of the call were either only had a black and white printer or had, different vision. Like, hey, maybe let's think about contrast in our style guide.
Right. Or the malicious compliance where you, I will 100% stick to this.
Yep.
And look, here's a nice gray blob that looks, it's 12 lines, but, it's pretty clear that it's a blob now.
Yep.
That's actually a delightful subreddit. There's I think it's actually called malicious compliance.
Yes.
Where people literally obey the rules to the letter. And just to prove a point as to how ridiculous they are. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, those are great.
It's a common theme for sure, is, obeying the law. I mean, take, for example, the speed limit, right? If everybody drove the speed limit, that would, exactly, it would probably change traffic flow tremendously. And I'm guessing all the people designing all the roads have built in a level of speeding that exists rather than built in, everybody's totally going to drive, 45 miles an hour through this section of road. I will design it for exactly that.
If you got everybody to drive exactly the same speed, maintain the same distance, and not change lanes unless they absolutely had to, and properly zipper merge, then the world will be a glorious place.
Then the computers have won.
Yeah.
That's all I know. Then we know the computers have won. No, and I think that's what makes self-driving cars so attractive as a concept, is that they can do those things and make things work a little bit better. But they also have to talk to each other, communicate, make room for one another, those kinds of things. And
you have to take into account the things we've been talking about, where here are the rules around driving a car. Here's when you break those rules.
Right.
Here's when you should go on the curb.
Yes. There's a giant boulder in your way.
Exactly.
Stay in your lane.
Yeah.
No, that's bad.
There's a giant boulder. Oh no, that's just a shadow. Okay, cool.
Yeah, right. Drive on
That
the
was an
shoulder.
episode of The Office, right? They used
Yep.
one of the first navigation things, and they ended up in a lake. And
Yep.
Michael Scott was not going to, no, he's telling me to take a right here. Well, that's a lake. Yep, I'm going in. I like that one.
That's a delicious compliance, maybe.
That is malicious compliance, kind of.
It's
If you think
oblivious
you're-
compliance.
Oblivious compliance. There you
That's
go.
like self-sacrificing compliance. I'm gonna drive this vehicle into this lake and suffer the consequences, so that they will fix their map.
Right.
Yeah.
Take one for the team. All right. With that, any parting thoughts?
I think Peter said it great. Break some of the rules some of the time.
Yes.
Or-
Do not break all the rules all the time. That's for sure.
And just for fun, one of these days, try following literally every single rule, right? For your project, for your organization, for everything. Try following literally all of them. That would be a fun little thought experiment.
All
Take me
right.
all
With
day.
that, I think we'll say goodbye, everybody. Goodbye.
Goodbye,
Bye, everybody.
everybody.
Goodbye.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.